Hello there, Comic Clan, and welcome to Comics to the Cross, the greatest streamers you've never heard of. I, of course, am one of your hosts for today, Cross, along with my co-host Nitro, who is just above me.
What up?
And
How's it going, everybody?
We, of course, are joined by a very special guest today. Ringo Award nominated writer, comic creator, an all-around awesome dude. David Pepose is here with us today. He is joining us, and this has been a long time coming, this interview, and thank you for your changing schedule with this. We were meant to do this last week, and my whole household came down with everything that it could have possibly happened, so we had to change it, so thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. I'm glad your family's on the mend. And thank you so much for inviting me. I'm excited to be here. I'm excited to talk some comics with you this beautiful Sunday. And thanks so much for having me, guys. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course, man. Of course. We're so excited and so glad to have you on the show. For the Comic Clan, for everyone that's listening in, obviously, just 2 weeks ago we did our indie comic book club and got to delve into Spencer Locke. A book that has been on my list for a long time to delve into and to jump into, one that I've been very excited to check out, and it did not disappoint. So it's kind of an honour to get to sit down and talk with the creative mind behind Spencer and Locke, and just talk comics with you and get to delve into your creative process a little bit and some of the other great work you've put out there.
Thank you. The honor's all mine, and I'm excited to talk about I guess my process as it were, however haphazard and slapdash that it might wind up being in practice.
Hey, no problem at all. Some of the best stuff comes out of working in that sort of way. But thank you for everyone who has joined us today. Looks like we've got a few people popping off in chat already. Thank you so much for joining us. Let me just post a little couple of things in chat, which you can see it in our title. You can pull these up at any time. Just places to find David online at his website, his newsletter, on social media, as well as links to some of the comics we will be talking about today. You can click on those at any time to delve into some of this stuff and get to know his work a little bit better. But of course, we're going to kick off with just a little bit of news today, just to kind of get into the way of things. And the major thing to talk about, I think that the whole comic book community has kind of been talking about, is obviously Marvel's Loki show that dropped on Friday on Disney+. I think pretty much every place I've went that talks about comics or superheroes or anything has been delving into theories of what is coming on Loki. From Agent Carter being in the background of one of the shots, to are we going to see Kang the Conqueror make his appearance in the show, to a million other things out there that people are starting to throw at the wall. So, gentlemen, what were your thoughts then? This is the third show that we've had come to Disney Plus from Marvel. What were your thoughts on Loki?
I can go first.
Oh yeah, go ahead, please.
Yes. So I really liked it. I thought it was really cool. I think obviously Loki is one of the most fleshed out villains in the Marvel universe, I think. So I think they even fleshed him out more. Like that one conversation that Owen Wilson's character had with him, Morbius, I think, in that room where he was basically breaking down his why he is the way that he is, and if he likes killing people or whatnot. I thought that entire conversation tracked out over the series of fights and corridor mishaps and everything. I thought that was awesome. I think they shot down a lot of the rumors that had already started, like a Mephisto. But yeah, man, I enjoyed it. I'm excited to see what's coming next.
I really dug it. I think it's interesting because I think one of the critiques that sometimes people throw at the Marvel movies or the Marvel shows is, at this point it's kind of hard for it to be accessible. And I think this pilot, or this first episode, I should say, it was a fun way of kind of laying out all the exposition you need to know what Loki's past is and kind of what he's like as a character. Because I think there are a lot of people who, I'm sure, Thor Ragnarok notwithstanding, I think Thor is probably like the least explored character of that kind of that Marvel Trinity, so to speak. A lot of people know Iron Man, a lot of people know Cap. They've crossed over a few more times. And so if you didn't watch Thor Ragnarok, and or you're not familiar, you didn't see the first two Thor movies because you weren't interested, This is a good way to like bring somebody up to speed, but in a way that I thought was kind of additive to the mix. It didn't
Hmm.
just feel like a Wikipedia dump, which I thought was really cool and really interesting. I'm very curious to see how they deal with the villain of the piece, whether or not it's well, I won't even spoil for those who haven't watched it. But yeah, I thought it was really interesting. I saw an article comparing Loki to they called him the Daffy Duck of the Marvel universe.
Mm.
He's a guy who, he can't win. That his biggest impact is just taking his licks, or the Bugs Bunnies of the Marvel universe. And now we get to see Daffy get his due. And
Yeah.
as a longtime Daffy fan, I love that analogy, and so I'm really excited to see where the show goes.
It's
Yeah,
funny you
yeah.
say that. I saw somebody online refer to him as he's the jobber of the MCU for our wrestling fans. I was like, dude,
Mhm.
that's actually really accurate.
Yeah.
Yeah, this all-powerful god of mischief, like, constantly gets his ass kicked, like,
Yeah, yeah.
non-stop during the MCU, and it's like, it was a really interesting take on Loki, because obviously, like, we've kind of gotten to know Loki so far, all the way up to, like, his death in Infinity War. Spoilers for a, like, what is it, 4-year-old movie at this point? Um,
How dare you?
I know, how dare I? But like getting to delve back to like this is the Loki that like was at the end of Avengers, like when you see him disappear with the Tesseract. So like this one hasn't like went through like the anti-hero redemption arc of like Thor Ragnarok and stuff. This is still full blown, I am burdened with glorious purpose, Loki.
Yeah.
This is still the full blown I deserve to be king because I do. I was born for this. But it was a really interesting direction to take him, and the interesting thing I found about it was that we still don't fully know where his head is at, because obviously, like when there's a little jailbreak bit when he tries to escape and he starts going hunting for the Tesseract, and we get the cool little scene of like where he goes to the guy that took the Tesseract and he's just got a drawer full of Infinity Stones.
Yeah.
And they make the joke of like these are just paperweights like round the office now, and like he starts to realize these are not the most powerful thing. There's something even more powerful.
Hmm.
And it then goes to like him starting to realize like maybe I do need to go along with this. Maybe I should work with him and work with the TVA. But you're also kind of like, has he had that revelation moment, or is this his way to get? Because he realised the TVA is more powerful than the Infinity Stones. Is this his way to get to an even greater power than what he was seeking at that time?
Yeah.
So it's like there's almost still that kind of like, is he becoming that hero again, that anti-hero-esque character, or is he just going full villain again, looking for the next power trip? And it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of plays out, I think, especially with everything else that was hinted at during the show, because there's so many things that they hint at in here, but I'm all in for it.
Yeah, I mean, we try to find, like, we like to believe that there's good in everyone, even, like, the really quote-unquote bad people, like, that we see. So I thought the part where, Mobius, there we go, sorry, is drilling him with, like, do you like to kill people? And he keeps asking him the same question, and it finally gets to the part where he's like, no, I don't like killing people. It's just, that's what I feel like I have to do to basically create this illusion of power. I was like, that was a really cool, like, just expansion of his character. I thought that was really cool.
No, absolutely. I think they definitely delve into his character really, really well in this, and I'm really excited to see. And then, obviously, like we said, we're not going to kind of mention the big reveal at the end of who the person he's getting brought in to help with is, the villain, quote unquote, for the piece is. Hey, thank you so much, Ads, for that host. We appreciate it. But yeah, like we're not going to reveal who that is, but like even that in itself is like, okay, that's going to be interesting. That's going to be like, how is that going to play out going forward?
Yeah.
Assuming they actually go through with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Which
that's
it. I'm part of me is a little skeptical they're even going to go through with it. That it might not be a misdirect for somebody else. We'll see.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like that. It's like, oh well, they've hinted at it. I hope it's probably not going to be. And then it's like, yeah, because they've not misdirected us at all in these Disney Plus shows yet. Like whereas something like WandaVision was nothing but misdirection. Like, hey, we're doing a multiverse. No, we're not.
Yeah.
Hey, the devil's in it. No, he's not.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, hey, Quicksilver. No, he's not. He's Ralph Boner. It's like, wow, you literally set up a
Like,
whole
really?
season Boner
It's the
joke.
biggest troll ever.
But yeah, I'm excited to see where they go with this. And from what Kevin Feige says, this show's going to link in like even more to the MCU than the other shows, which makes sense because all they did in this first episode was literally talk about like, you know, the multiverse and the sacred timeline, and how if the timelines, you know, split and create a multiverse again, it's going to create a war. It's going to be madness. No, we're not hinting at anything. What do you mean? We've got nothing with multiverse and madness in it coming up. What are you talking about? You know, it's like, so yeah, it's probably going to have a little bit of an influence on the upcoming Doctor Strange 2, Multiverse and Madness, and the upcoming Spider-Man movie, and you know, whatever they do with Wanda now that WandaVision's done, because she's linked into it, and everything else that's been hinted at that's part of the multiverse.
Yeah.
So it's like it's going to be interesting to see how this unfolds. So I think I'm definitely excited for this season.
Yeah, it's gonna be cool. Like, I was watching it with my wife the other night, so it's cool seeing it from a perspective of not really a huge comic book fan. And she's like, I feel like they've done, like, everyone has done the time travel thing a lot. So I hope they make this interesting. And I don't know. I just, judging from the first episode, I think they're gonna go in some crazy places, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing with the time travel thing, now that you mention it, is I've seen an article talking about it, and like, because everyone was people were asking questions about the time travel stuff, and like, you know, Loki created a new like branch off the timeline which he was captured for. Like, he was never meant to escape with the Tesseract, and people kept asking like, well, what about when at the end of Endgame when Captain America just decides, I'm going to stay in the past with Peggy? Was he captured? Was he taken away and this stuff? Because like, how does the time travel side of things work? And basically they came out and said like, how time travel is described in Endgame doesn't mean is how time travel works. That's just how these characters understand it.
Oh, okay.
So it's like, it's basically like this is probably not going to be the Endgame style of time travel, and that's okay. That's how they understood it and coped with it. But this is how time travel really works in the Marvel universe. This is
Back to the Future.
Yeah, the actual Back to the Future way it looks like. You know.
Yeah.
But
I was gonna bake my noodle for a little while.
I know. I'm too dumb to have this conversation right now.
I think I will always be too dumb to have this conversation, to be completely honest. Like, I still like, how many years?
Endgame time travel is confusing enough.
Yeah, like, how many years are we on from Endgame, and I still don't totally understand how that works. It's like, oh, it creates a new timeline, and I'm like, yeah, but surely that timeline still exists, and like, these different timelines are just there now. It's like, I still don't get it. I still like, this makes no sense. I understand you've basically said words to me, and I meant to just go, okay.
About 5 seconds into the Ancient One's conversation with Bruce Banner, I lost it. I'm like, I have no idea what she's talking about.
At minimum, there's 2 branch timelines because Mjolnir got taken from Asgard circa 2012, I guess, and then Thanos just went missing in like 2016.
Yeah,
and so I'm like, I don't. They set it up and then they let those 2 things go. So I hope Loki cleans that up. I hope Loki addresses that.
Yeah, I'm like, they've just been left. Yeah, they've just been left hanging there. Like, we're not going to address those. And
like everybody will forget about them eventually.
Like,
and if Loki is doing time for surviving, the Avengers need to do some time too. I'm very curious. We're gonna see now. We'll see how the show goes. But if they won't address some of these things, I'm gonna be. I'll be a little disappointed. I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah. I mean, like, this is your perfect chance to address some of those stuff. Like, you don't even need to give like this great explanation. Just give me something. Just something, you know.
Do something.
But it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to kind of to check out what they do with this and the time travel, and I'm in. I'm all in for it. Like, I loved the first episode. Tom Hiddleston he's phenomenal as always as Loki. This is his role. I mean, the guy took a role that was, let's be honest, wasn't really meant to do much past the first Avengers movie, and is somehow still doing it, like, you know, almost 10 years later past that, because that was like, he was going to be the big bad for Avengers, and you know that's where the cut-off was meant to be. Like, we're really not going to touch on him too much. He'll maybe be in the background of the Thor movies, and then and everyone just popped off with how much they loved him, and it's like, okay, we need to write Loki and things now. We need to keep him getting involved, and it's like, okay. And here we go, he's got his own series now, so...
He's such a good actor, though.
I
was, again, watching him with Owen Wilson, just that conversation piece just really stuck out to me in that show.
Yeah, and can I just say a massive, like, shout out to how awesome Owen Wilson is in this show. I like,
wow,
when they like announced he was going to be in it, it's one of those things of like, this could either go really well or really badly, and it could have been one of the worst miscastings ever, and he rocked it. Owen Wilson just done amazing in it, and I'm like, I'm excited to see Mobius like going forward and what they do with him, and like, I'd love to see him stick around doing stuff now. He was awesome. Yeah,
just the nonchalantness with the way, with how he was talking to Loki was freaking hilarious. He was basically just smacking him around. It was hilarious.
Yeah. But yeah, just to address chat there, it's like, thank you, Nitro, for doing that shout out for our friend Locksteady. If you are listening and here on Twitch and aren't following our friend on his channel, click that link and go and check out Locksteady. He actually had his first solo stream last night, where he hit over 50 followers, so he is on the path to being a Twitch affiliate, so go and check him out.
Nice.
Ads, you need to stop putting fights in for the superhero square goal. You just redeemed another one. Thor for DC and Thor for Marvel. Let me write this down before I forget. So David, you're probably not seeing it on here, but like on our Twitch channel, we have like point redemptions. We do a superhero square goal, we call it, and it's basically like we set up like a 7-fight match card of like heroes to face off with each other, and we've got a point redemption of like people can, once you earn enough points on the channel, you can redeem to book a fight to put on it, like something you want to see. And one of our viewers who's been here since like day one, Ads, has like redeemed the fight card worth of fights plus. He's used it like all his points, and he's just redeemed another one, and it's like, dude, I'm literally gonna have to split your fights between 2 cards at this point.
Nice.
This is an Ads sponsored swear go.
Yeah, pretty much. It's like he has literally redeemed every channel point he has made to making fights. It's like, yeah, but this one needs to be done. I'm like, you say that, but you've already booked like 7-8 fights already, so like, so there's literally going to be a show just of his stuff.
What did they book?
So this one he booked was Thor from the Marvel Universe versus Thor from the DC Universe. So a Thor v Thor match.
Interesting.
I'm going to be honest, I did not know Thor existed in the DC Universe.
Yeah, he does. It's not one of the god set they usually touch on, because DC usually focuses a lot more on the Greek gods, because of Wonder Woman and stuff. But the Asgardians are still there. So I need to do a little research. I don't know that much about the Asgardian gods in DC and what that Thor's even kind of like. So
yeah, I feel like I've seen him like once in a DC book, and I don't even remember. I assume it'd be Wonder Woman, but I can't even think about what the DC Thor looks like.
I've got to look it up now. I got to look it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna look up. I couldn't even tell you what he looked like in DC or anything like that. It's like you see Thor in comics, and I'll just think of Marvel. So, but we will add it to the fight card, and I think we pretty much do have a 7-match fight card that's just fights from Ad. So that will be a special we'll be doing at some point in the near future.
To be honest, he looks like Gimli from Lord of the Rings in a Thor helmet. So,
I'm weirdly okay with that. Like. But yeah, so I think that's pretty much everything on the Loki show. If you've not checked it out yet, I think we all thoroughly recommend to go and check it out. It's on Disney Plus, and just episode 1 is dropped, so you've got the rest of the season coming ahead. So get caught up quickly and be ready for it. I do want to give a special shout out as we're talking shows, because I finally managed to finish the show. It came out a couple of weeks ago, and it's a special shout out to a book that's on our indie book club list that we're going to be doing at some point in the near future. Is the show Sweet Tooth on Netflix, based on Sweet Tooth by Jeff Lemire, probably one of my favourite writers of all time, who, like Jeff Lemire, pick up any book of his and you're pretty much guaranteed a good time. And I think they did a phenomenal job with the show on Netflix. If you've not checked it out on Netflix, the they did a great job with it and adapting the comic and really helping you just delve into this phenomenal world of post-apocalyptic hybrids, and I'm not going to lie, viruses that were a little bit hitting too close to home watching that show. Watching these people walk around and people are coughing and masking themselves, and I'm like, okay, that's a little too close to home right now. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, it was. I thought it was terrific. I mean, I was saying to my partner when we were watching it, I told her, honestly, I'm a little I'm a little scared for Y the Last Man, because I almost feel like Sweet Tooth kind of beat that whole show to the punch. I think in a really profound way. It's different than the source material. I think in a big way, particularly visuals, just because the way that the Jeff Lemire draws is like it's almost like outsider art. Like it's very it's an acquired taste, and there's that feeling of kind of creepiness and foreboding.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the characters in the source material have a lot harsher of an edge, pretty much from top to bottom. This they kind of, sanding it down makes it sound like a bad thing. But I think they made it much more palatable to a wider audience, and made it just really endearing. For a post-apocalyptic story, it was endearing, and I loved it.
No pun intended.
Yeah, you're right. No, it was. I think that the ending came maybe a little abruptly, sure, and I do think that's something that's a little systemic in a lot of comic book TV shows. Everybody's still ironing out the pacing a little bit, but I thought it was terrific. I thought the actor who played Gus was fantastic.
Yeah, he was great.
Will Forte really kind of stole the show, I think, in a big way, which good for him. I think he's a highly underrated actor with a real versatility that I think a lot of people don't get. And I enjoyed it. And honestly, my only regret is that season 2 hasn't been announced yet.
Yeah.
But I would hope, especially after Jupiter's Legacy, that Netflix would do the right thing and greenlight season 2 for Sweet Tooth immediately. So,
they definitely need to. They definitely need to greenlight Sweet Tooth season 2, and the show was just phenomenal to watch. And I love the fact that they did make changes to the comic, they did make changes to the source material, which you're always going to get and stuff like this. But like you said, like these characters were so enjoyable. Like I enjoyed going on the journey, like going with Gus and going with Big Man and going with Bear, and like as these characters all start to come together as the show goes on, you're like you feel like you're part of this little family traveling with them, and then you've also got the other stories that are happening over here, and you're seeing like little connections being made and little things kind of fitting. Like these characters, you've been watching their story separately, and you realise, they kind of cross paths at this point, and like, that's really cool. And there's different little things where it's like this world, they invest you in every story, but also they don't expose too much. They make you want to keep watching to see what happens next. I'm excited for a season 2, and I hope it doesn't go the way of Jupiter's Legacy, which obviously got cancelled. And in all honesty, I understand why that show was cancelled, because I think I'd said it to people in our Discord when we were chatting. Was like, I enjoyed half that show.
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like I really enjoyed like the flashback scenes and seeing how they came to be and getting their powers, but like the actual present day stuff, I literally feel like I watched like 8 episodes of nothing happening in the present day. Like you could have done that in like 3 episodes and done some more. Like I felt like nothing was taking place, and it's like you have to be hardcore invested at that point to want to see more of it. Most people probably tuned out at that point, which is sad because it did have potential and it did have some legs under it to do something. But for me, Sweet Tooth just hit the nail on the head. It was just perfect, and I'm well invested to see more of these characters. So yeah, full shout out to Netflix and their take on Sweet Tooth. If you've got Netflix and haven't checked out Sweet Tooth yet, go and check out the show for yourself. And at some point in the near future, we'll definitely be covering the comic on the show. Excuse me. Alright, I don't think there was any other vast pieces of news. Did you know of anything or think of anything, Nitro? Or
No, I think those were the main things. Yeah, I think we covered it.
Cool. Then we are going to transition over into our actual interview portion of the podcast today. Just before we delve in, massive shout out to our sponsor, Gamer Grind Co., the #1 coffee for gamers. # on that grind. And they've been our sponsors pretty much since day one of the launch of the podcast. You'll see the link there in chat. Go and get yourself some amazing coffee. Use Comics in the Cross at checkout to save yourself 5%. And also helps kick a little bit of money to keep the podcast going and help out the show. But you will not be disappointed by their coffee. I've been drinking it pretty much, almost exclusively for like a year, and I'm pretty happy with it. Alright. Housekeeping out the road. We, of course, as we said at the start, are joined by a very special guest today who we are so excited to have on the show, David Pepose. We are talking about Spencer Locke, which of course we did on the show a couple of weeks ago when we dove into. So if you were here a couple of weeks ago, you've already got a little look at that and hopefully went and picked it up for yourself. If you've not, definitely still a chance. We're going to be delving into some Scouts of Honor. The series that wrapped up, issue 5 came out a few weeks ago now. I want to say 3 weeks ago.
Just wrapped up, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago. Yeah,
I want to say about 3 weeks ago, which well worth checking out.
It was a month ago. It was a month ago yesterday.
A month ago already? Hey, Co-op Trio Podcast coming in with that raid of 6 people. Thank you so much. Welcome on in, Raiders. We appreciate you coming in. Locke, can you do a shout out for Co-op Trio for us? For anyone who is brand new to us that don't know who we are, who's just coming in for this, we are Comics in the Cross, the greatest streamers you have never heard of, and we are burdened with glorious... I completely forgot the word. Dang, that completely ruined that. Glorious purpose. There we go. I literally blanked on that. We were literally just talking low-key, and I blanked on that phrasing.
That's hilarious.
I'm going to go sit in the corner now. Geek card revoked.
You get a timeout, mister.
Timeout. Geek card revoked. We, of course, are a podcast here on Sundays, which you are now hearing part of for our very special podcast, as well as doing some variety streams throughout the week. On Monday nights, I play through some storyline games, and my co-host Nitro up in the corner there on Tuesday nights does a lot of artwork. If you're interested in seeing some amazing original artwork, come and check out his streams on Tuesdays. We are so welcome to have you here. So glad that you decided to lock steady, glorious porpoise. Yes, we are burdened with glorious porpoise. We are burdened with glorious porpoise at this show. So many glorious porpoises. But thank you everyone for popping in. We of course are just about to, you're here just in time. We are literally just about to kick off our interview portion of the podcast. We are joined by Mr. David Pepose, the Ringo Award nominee, comic writer and creator. If you were here a few weeks ago, as I said, we were talking Spencer and Locke, delving into that world. And you got to delve into that with us, as well as Scouts of Honor, which we've mentioned, another phenomenal comic that just wrapped a month ago, as David had said. I can't believe that was a month ago already that came out. That's crazy.
Yeah, that's crazy.
I literally feel like it's not been that long since I went and picked up issue 5. And then, of course, we're going to be delving into some other works of his. The O.Z., his most recent one, that has just dropped. Issue 1 of that on
awesome.
Their Kickstarter, which I am so excited to pick up. If for nothing else, go to their Kickstarter page for that and watch the video telling you what the comic is about. I'm like, watch that video and you're sold. Like, I literally watched that and I'm like, okay, I'm picking this up. Yeah. This has to be bought because I need to know what happens.
Because we'll be returning to Kickstarter very soon with our double-sized issue 2.
Nice.
There you go. So here's your chance. Get over to their Kickstarter for that and pick up issue 1 and keep an eye out for issue 2 dropping, which if it's, if issue 1 holds up as good as the video kind of sells it as, it's going to be phenomenal. And if issue 2 holds up to that as well, I can only imagine how great it's going to be. It's going to be definitely worth checking out.
Yeah. All I'll say is issue 1's the quiet issue. Issue 2, we really crank up the volume in a big way. I
detecting a theme in your comments, because you told me that as well when I said I tweeted out how good I enjoyed the first issue of Scouts of Honor. You're like, oh, that's a quiet one. This all kicks off, and
the first one's always the quietest.
And he wasn't lying. Full disclosure, he was not lying. After issue 1, that comic kicks off in a direction you just don't expect with all this stuff. I'm like, okay, this is where we're going. Awesome.
Are we doing this?
Well, no, I'm excited to talk about all these things. I will say, I feel like we missed an opportunity. We really should have called this episode "Burdened with Glorious Pepos." Um,
Mm.
Can we retitle it? Is
I
it too late?
when that go,
Retitle it whenever you want.
when that goes up,
Hilarious.
100% when that goes up on our audio podcast and the links, and it goes up on YouTube, that is 100% the title of this episode. I cannot believe I did not think of that. I am ashamed that did not come up to think of. That's amazing.
No, you see enough typos of your last name on social media, and it sticks with you. But no, I'm excited to talk about all my books, from Spencer Locke to Scout's Honor to OZ and Going to the Chapel and anything else you want to talk about. But yeah, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to talk about the books, and thank you guys again for all the support that you've given my work.
Yeah, absolutely. And as I kind of said to you before we came on air, and I'm like, we don't, we're generally not people that blow smoke up people's asses. Like, we don't shout out stuff and say, oh, this is amazing, just because we're talking to someone, or just like we talk to people whose work we really and thoroughly, totally enjoy, and that we honestly think, hey, this is an amazing book, you should check it out. That's part of Indie Comic Book Club is, that we do is like, we're just really delving into the world of indie comics a bit more. We grew up as Marvel and DC fans, and there's this whole world of indie stuff out there, and
with really good stories.
And it's like, and if we don't enjoy something that we're reading, we honestly give our critiques on it, and like, this is an issue I've got with this, and Spencer Locke was like this phenomenal story to read, and as I said it to you already, like, it's honestly one of my favorite comics, like one of my favorite comics I've ever read. Like, 100%, I was so invested in that story.
Thank you. That book's my baby. It's my first published work, and it's a book that changed my life. I think in a really big and noticeable way. And so it's just it's really the culmination of a long time. We talked a little bit earlier before we started recording. You were asking, well, how'd you get involved in this? And I feel like I've been kind of on the outskirts of the comics industry since 2008. I got my start as a DC Comics intern when I graduated college. And so I worked on like Final Crisis and Batman R.I.P. and Green Lantern Secret Origin.
So nothing big at all then? Nothing major?
Nothing we would know.
It was, but I spent a lot of time kind of saying, I want to be involved in this industry, and I have no idea in what capacity. I worked in comics journalism for a long time. I was the reviews editor over at Newsarama for about a decade. But at the same time, I grew up in the Midwest, St. Louis, Missouri. I didn't really have a whole lot of creative role models. I didn't know anybody who made a living writing. I thought it was not for me. I thought it wasn't meant for me. And it was only after kind of years of reading comics and writing about comics, and at times having periods where I was frustrated with comics, I had kind of this voice in the back of my head that says, well, if you're so smart, why don't you try it? And Spencer and Locke that was really the first time that I had taken a crack at doing something a little more long form. And I had thought, people say write what you know, and I think it's the most misunderstood bit of writing advice that anybody can give you. Usually what people take that to mean is, oh, well, I can't write a medical drama if I don't have a medical degree, or a legal drama if I don't have a legal degree, or like what bit of my professional expertise has to get translated into a script. And that's not what they mean at all. What they mean is, the emotional journey. What's the sort of universal thing? For example, if you're writing an Archie story, I'm just going to throw that out there. What was it like when you first learned to drive a car? Or what was it like when you first had your first kiss? Or went on your first date? Like those sorts of universal emotional journeys. Everybody has a story. It's always a different story. And so, but at the time, I was still thinking about kind of the old way of it. And I said, well, I don't know anything about anything except comics. And I realized like maybe that's not as limiting as I thought.
Yeah.
So I was a big fan of classic Frank Miller. His Daredevil, The Man Without Fear, was kind of the book that like That was the real light bulb moment for me as a kid, where I was like, oh, like writers write these things and
Mhm.
artists draw these things. It's not like by some Hallmark card by committee.
Yeah.
And I was like, what's the weirdest thing I could throw against old school Frank Miller? And I went through a couple of ideas that they all felt very shock for shock value's sake, and I didn't think that would really build any long-term investment
Hmm.
or engagement, both for the audience, but also for me as a lazy writer who like you need the motivation to get across the finish line. And when I thought of Calvin and Hobbes, Bill Watterson, light bulb went off.
Oh,
I thought about beat up and kind of grinning in the rain, and he's holding a stuffed animal.
Hmm.
I thought, oh, what's that guy's home life like? What was his upbringing?
Yeah.
And those questions turned into that book.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I'm really glad that it spoke to you guys because, especially having come from the comics journals and trenches, and I'm sure you guys can relate to this. Is you put in your time. You're in the trenches. You're in the mines, and always wonder, is this thing on? Is anybody listening? Does anybody
Hmm.
care? I would write reviews that I poured my heart and soul into, and then one comment, no comment,
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
and so the fact that people seem to really respond to the work and respond positively, like not with like pitchforks and torches, which was the other thing I was expecting with that book. The fact that people responded really positively
Hmm.
it really blew my mind. It still blows my mind. I still feel like I'm kind of being punked anytime somebody wants to talk about my work. But Spencer and Locke, I think, is in certain ways the riskiest book I've ever done, and I think also one of the most personal.
Hmm.
And I think it's a book that I love selling that book. I love introducing it to new readers because I think there is something a little universal about it, about somebody who has trauma in their past and gets beat up by the universe and still kind of gets up and does
Yeah.
the right thing, no matter
Yeah.
how much it hurts.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say, like, when we were reviewing it a couple weeks ago, it felt like a very personal story. Like, I like emotionally resonated with the story. That doesn't happen a lot when you read comics. Like, they're trying to like force an emotion or pull an emotion out of a page when it's not there. And it was
Right.
very very easy to emotionally connect to this book. Like, and
Okay.
I know Cross, you and I talked about it a couple times. There's a couple times in Spencer and Locke where I audibly made a noise, like when it was like an emotional gut punch, like especially the interaction between Spencer and Hero
Mhm.
and Spencer and Locke, like when Locke just gives in to his emotions.
Yeah.
It was really good. Especially, yeah, obviously, I'm a dad coming from a dad perspective. It was really good.
Well, I owe a lot of that to my co-creator and collaborator on that book, George Santiago Jr. He is such an artist's artist. He's so versatile and he's able to really wring every last drop of emotion out of a
Mm,
page. I feel like it's funny. He and I, we come from very different worlds. I grew up meat and potatoes superhero.
mm,
He was manga influenced. That was
mm,
really, Ranma One Half, Cowboy Bebop. Those were his big influences. And where we kind of come together as this odd couple is we both love making people cry.
mm.
That was sort of I think that was like the magnetism that pulled us together. Is we want to make people cry, and we're both also like punishingly brutal on ourselves in terms of like what is considered good enough.
Hmm.
I think I'm my own worst critic, and I know
Mhm.
George is his worst critic. And so I think as a result, we were both really hungry. We wanted to make a splash with our first published works.
Yeah.
George had self-published a few things, but this was our big debut in the direct market. And I told him, I said, you go to the mat with this, I'll go to the mat with this.
Hmm.
And yeah, I just he's such a terrific collaborator, and I've already told him that I plan on working with him as often as I'm able, as often as he'll allow,
Hmm.
because he's such a terrific collaborator that I cannot say enough good things about him.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's crazy because a lot of times the tone of a comic or the art of the comic doesn't match the tone of it. You know,
Sure.
like the tone of what they're trying to put across the story and everything like that. And I feel like, and Cross, I know again we talked about this, but I feel like this is the perfect amalgamation of those two. That the tone from the writing and the art that matches it. It's it's
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's perfect.
I mean,
He did it.
we've said it plenty of times that like a really good story can be ruined by awful artwork.
Yeah.
100%.
You know, as
Yeah.
like and vice versa. Like a really awful story can still be elevated by really good artwork. It's like there's this. They both play off of each other, but to find a story that has this artwork that really fits the tone of what's being written, helps to elevate the writing helps to reflect the artwork, and they just work in such unison. I feel like
Hmm.
Spencer and Locke is one of those comics where it's like every bit, every drawing, every picture fits the story that's being told. You
Yeah, there's
know,
no wasted pictures. There's no wasted panels.
from the the Calvin and Hobbes esque like flashbacks to the when we first see them as cops like in that alleyway, to even like when Spencer or when Locke is having his crazy like flashback, I'm a spaceman, scene where he's like completely out of his head. Like the
Yeah,
artwork
yeah.
changes, but every bit of it fits the tone of the book. It's all the same tone. It all fits together so well, and I can't compliment both of you so well, because like I
Yeah.
think it's one of those things where they both come together. It's like it's not just your work and not just Santiago. It's like both coming together
This is,
make this story phenomenal.
Mhm.
I'd say this is just as much George's baby as mine, and I'd say I'd even go so far as to say I don't think the book he kind of tempers the tone of the book, I think, in a big way. That like we were talking about with Sweet Tooth, he makes the book a little more palatable, a little more
Mm.
accessible. Because I think if you had played my script completely straight, if you had gotten like an Eduardo Riso type, like really kind of gritty, I think people would have been turned off. They would have seen the book as this like deeply oppressive grit fest,
Mhm.
and the thing I always try to avoid is, I don't want to be like one of those like edge lords who's, just doing gritty, and
Yeah.
shocking for the sake
Yeah.
of, because I think that can, it doesn't breed long-term engagement or investment in the characters, and it can veer into exploitation territory, which is not something I want to do, especially with the subject matter that I tend to tackle. And I think George was the only artist who could have pulled off this book.
Yeah.
And he is just, like I've said, he's such a versatile artist. He's able to really kind of shift gears in terms of tone very naturally. And, the thing that always blew my mind was I had originally hired him thinking, he would just do the present day scenes and we'd find somebody else to do the flashbacks. And I said, so do you want me to find somebody to do the flashbacks? He's like, oh no, I got it covered. I was like,
That's
covered? He's
awesome.
like, yeah, yeah, I got it. And he does such a great job at putting his own style on the iconic Bill Watterson cartooning, or
Hmm.
the iconic Mort Walker Beetle Bailey cartooning in Volume Two. And it's just really next level. And he's my ride or die, and I'm so grateful and fortunate that we were able to cross paths for this book.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a phenomenal pairing, and it's pulled off something phenomenal. It's one of those great pairings that you find every so often in comics where it works and it's elevated each other. And yeah, I think Spencer and Locke is definitely all the better for it, for that
Yeah.
pairing.
Yeah, and
He,
you
he,
said something earlier. You were talking about the grit of the book. Like, it is definitely gritty, but I think where you guys do a really good job is just the color palette that you guys choose. Like, it's definitely
uh,
dark, it's gritty, and it deals with some heavy
Smith.
stuff, but it
Uh,
is incredibly colorful. You
I
know?
think Jason. I mean, it's funny when you guys were talking about how good art can make or break a book. I'd go one step further and I'd say good colors make or break the art, which then makes the book.
Yeah.
And Jason Smith he's a really talented colorist, and I'm always shocked that more people don't know about him, and that he doesn't get more work, because Yeah, he is. He and I work together very closely. I probably worked closer with Jason than I even did George
Mm,
uh, on the artwork. I had taken classes with Chris Sotomayor on coloring. And when I was at DC as a DC intern, that was the thing that really drilled into me was, give good color notes and it'll really up the whole book's game.
yeah.
And so, yeah, Jason and George are a phenomenal pairing. It took a little while to find the right colorist.
Mm,
We'd gone through a couple, and it just wasn't the right fit. But Jason, the way that he renders George's work, it really kind of adds a nice sense of depth. It adds a nice sense of energy.
hmm.
It really just levels up what are already some really amazing inks and just brings it to the next level. And yeah, I love Jason. I still work with Jason whenever I can.
Hmm.
He and I, he did a pinup for the OZ for our last
Nice.
issue, and he is working on some stuff for me right now. Hopefully for the next Kickstarter. So yeah, really, uh, working on some other stuff. Where when we inevitably do a full one shot of Roxy Rewind, we'll do a color version with Jason's colors on top of George's inks.
Nice.
So yeah, really terrific guy. I can't say enough good things about Jason, and I'm excited for the three of us to kind of be back in the saddle again for Volume 3.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it's phenomenal that you found a great team like that come together to put this book together, and that you're able to keep working with each other on all these other projects as well. Like you said, he's doing stuff for you for like the OZ and stuff like that. Well, he has done for issue one of that, and then he's going to be doing stuff hopefully for the next Kickstarter. And it's phenomenal that that relationship gets to keep growing and changing as well.
Yeah, it's I'm picky,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is when you're picky, your tribe self-selects a little bit, and sometimes it takes a little longer to find the people that you really click with and the people
Hmm.
that you trust. But when you do, and you're kind of like, all right, well, I'm going to give you work as long as you can handle it,
Yeah.
as much work as you can stand. And so, yeah, I'm very fortunate with getting to connect with people like George and Jason, because they really kind of started my lucky streak working with collaborators with my next books down the line.
Absolutely. We actually have a question coming in from our chat at the moment, so I'm just going to jump over there. It comes
Hit
from
me.
Tom Levine and says, David, do you work in beats or other small units of action? And if so, how would you define or delineate them?
Ooh, that's a good question. I mean,
I'm going to say that's a pretty epic question coming in our
That
chat,
is.
and I'm like,
I, I certainly break down, how I'm gonna, I certainly think about the structure. I'm usually thinking issue to issue. I'm usually thinking, okay, what's the high concept of each issue
Hmm.
that's sort of discrete from the overarching plot. If Spencer and Locke is, about a hard-boiled detective who investigates the murder of his childhood sweetheart with his partner, who's a 7 foot tall imaginary panther. That's sort of the general arc of the book. But issue one, is usually it's set up. It's
Hmm.
you introduce the case, you introduce the characters, and then you throw in like a complication to kind of show what they're made of. The second issue, I usually by issue two, I'm kind of like, okay, now that we've got issue one in the bag, everybody knows who everybody is. Is there any other setup that I need to do that I wasn't able to fit into issue one? Um, are there any additional complications I can throw at the character? Usually, I'm thinking, what's a fun set piece?
Yeah.
Usually, I like car chases.
Hmm.
That's usually what I do for a second issue. But sometimes it's just like a knockdown, drag out brawl,
Yeah.
like in Scout's Honor. Um, you know, uh, then depending on how long this series goes, it's kind of like, all right, what's like one big set piece that you can really kind of anchor the whole thing on? And so like for Scouts Honor, I said, oh, the Trials of the Eagle, like just kind of a cool big Hunger Games, version of the Eagle Scouts. And then know, it's sort of every issue needs to have its own identity. Heidi McDonald over the Beat calls it a satisfying chunk, you know. And I think as long as you're working in singles, you need to figure out a way to make every issue stand on its own 2 feet. Now, granted, when I'm outlining stuff, I will usually just have bullet points of like, what's a thing I want to hit in this script? Like, what's an image that just stands out to me? And then sometimes I'll kind of Jenga it together in a way that I'm like, all right, well, this moment wouldn't really fit it obviously wouldn't fit in a first issue. It probably wouldn't fit in a second. Is this a front half or a back half kind of thing? And yeah, so it's very much it's like sculpting, it's figuring it out. It's sculpting with a blindfold on. Is probably the best way to describe it. You're really feeling it out by touch.
That's a phenomenal way to describe it.
Or trying to do a Rubik's cube, where you're just kind of like, all right, this didn't work. All right, let's twist it in another way.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think for me, yeah, it's sometimes it's just like, well, what's a fun way to do, what's a fun image that pops out in my head, and how can I fit that in? And oftentimes that comes to me, I'm listening to some music, I'm working in an outline right now that was really kind of kicking my butt, and then somebody put on the Final Fantasy VII fight song on Twitter, and I listened to that, and I listened to that all afternoon, and I was like, oh yeah, this is like now I'm vibing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's sure. I mean, I think action beats I usually tend to plan out in advance. Emotional beats I'm usually kind of coming up with as the story's unfolding. Those are usually kind of hitting, in dialogue, oftentimes, or sort of when I'm plotting, when I'm actually writing out this, when I'm scripting it, panel to panel, I'll be like, oh, this could be a moment to really kind of squeeze some tears out,
Yeah.
In the actual plotting, overarching plotting, I try to think of certain emotional scenes, either about whether somebody might be, you might be losing a supporting character, or, your main character kind of has to, redouble their efforts or die. Those are usually kind of things that really grab and respond to me. Figuring out, like, is there a big secret, that kind of will turn their entire quest on its head.
Yeah.
Something I'm usually trying to think of. Yeah, I think, ultimately it's a hard thing to formalize. I think that's it's the one thing that I always say when I talk about processes. It always comes with a grain of salt, because ultimately it's whatever makes sense to you, and whatever gets the work done for you, then the process works. I could tell you all sorts of ways that I kind of structure things, and how I come up with ideas, and how I the time frame of how I work on my stuff, and you might be like, that's nonsense, and you'd be right, but I've gotten books out of it, so it's not nonsense to me.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's very much a mileage may vary kind of situation, but I think yeah, I'm usually at least trying to come up with like some images of just like what seems emotionally engaging, and what I think like a general audience might be interested in, and what I might be interested in personally. And usually if I can find some overlap there, that's where I tend to pace out my work.
Awesome.
So,
That was really cool. It was a really thank you, Tom Levine, for that question coming up in chat there. That was a phenomenal question, just to kind of delve into like the process of that creation. It's like I love hearing about it. And to Tom Levine, who is chatting away with Locke, and there, it's like, if it is indeed the Tom Levine, like, renowned author Tom Levine, and thank you so much for stopping by the podcast and hanging out with us. We appreciate you popping in today.
Yes.
He says, as far as he knows, that is him, and he's pretty sure he's the only one of him, so he's to the best of his knowledge. So,
well, there we go.
Which is the best answer you can possibly thank for. But thank you, David, for the answer to that question. That was honestly phenomenal, just to hear that process. I kind of want to change gears a little bit, just for a question I had that's kind of like Spencer and Locke, but it also kind of drifts into some of your other work. Has it been like an intentional choice of yours to basically, the right word here, to subvert stories that people already know? Because kind of like we talked about, like, like obviously Spencer and Locke, highly based upon Calvin and Hobbes. if you were not aware of that, from the first page of the first issue is very much a Calvin and Hobbes book, mixed with like you said, Beetle Bailey kind of becoming a reference in the second book for the villain that they face. You've mentioned references coming up for Spencer Locke 3 when we were talking off camera before that are referencing other stuff. Even to the OZ is basically a subversion of the Wizard of Oz story, although it's kind of a sequel to it as well, a little bit. Is that an intentional thing to do, or is that just kind of like where your creativity is taking you? Like, hey, I can mess with this.
It's yes and no. It's funny because it's some of it becomes like the best strengths of creator owned and the best strengths of licensed books. Is you're able to have those expectations and sort of the continuity through osmosis, and then you're able to build and subvert it. I do think some of that's my sense of humor, that I think I try to temper with the emotional beats. I always say I feel like half my high concepts are like a prank upon the reader that winds up being a prank upon myself, because then I have to like pull it off. But I always say I come up with trash concepts that I make you cry about. It's for me. I'm always drawn to stuff with just iconography. I mean, because you could say that the Boy Scouts, for example, Scouts Honor is very much in the same vein, where you're taking something that and kind of taking the piss out of it, turning it on. You could even say for my book Going to the Chapel, that's a book, it's a hostage heist situation that takes place at a wedding. So you get to play with all the wedding iconography. And iconography is something that really, that's the big thing that I'm usually drawn to. It's funny because I do feel like the way that my career has unspooled at the moment, you're seeing a lot more of my subversive streak, which is not all the stuff that I do, but that just so happens to be the way that the books have been released in that order. Books like, for example, Grand Theft Astro, which we are slowly but surely getting art on. That book, I compare it to the Fast and the Furious, and I compare it to like Back to the Future and Star Wars. And while those are certainly influences on the book, it still feels like its own thing. It's not. Oh, that's Dominic Toretto. If Dominic Toretto got a rocket ship, I think for me it's always, what's a high concept that's going to get like an emotional reaction? Usually a surprise laughter. That's usually the big thing. But sometimes I have a few concepts that are in the works and in various stages of development where it's sort of this feeling where it's more of, when I explain it, it kind of pulls on your heartstrings a little bit more. And that I think is a valid emotional response as well. But yeah, I think if I don't have a concept that like immediately makes you think like, oh, like, that's how could this monster pull that off? Then like I'm not really, it's not worth the time. I mean, it's such a weird way to think about it, but it's like I'm not the fastest writer out there. I'm not Donny Cates. I'm not Bendis. Who they're cranking out a script a week. It usually takes me 6 to 8 weeks to plot out a series. And then once that's done, then I can churn out a script every 2 weeks. But, that means that it usually takes, if I was working nonstop and being uninterrupted, which I am never uninterrupted, that would mean that I could crank out, maybe four series a year. The problem is that you have to add in like, I'm doing production work on other books, which does take a lot of my creative bandwidth. I'm doing conventions, and then just life happening, like a pandemic, or moving, things that I have experienced in the last year. So yeah, I think becomes a question of like what's worth the time invest. The last thing I want is to do a book that I'm like, oh, I feel like I wasted my time on that. Oh, that it doesn't feel like it's representative of my skills. It doesn't feel like it's scratching a particular itch. And that's part of the reason why I jump from genre to genre as much as I do, is because I'm restless by nature. And so this is a good way of sort of keeping me occupied, keeping me interested, keeping me engaged. Once I finish a crime book, usually the very last thing I want to do after that is another crime book.
Yeah.
Whereas, the OZ, I finished writing the OZ early last year. So that series has been long written, and I pretty much immediately went from that to Scout's Honor, just based on that was the concept that Aftershock went for, and and so the time that was done, doing kind of the darker. I mean, I went from fantasy to like post-apocalyptic, but there's certainly some shared traits between the two. I was like, okay, I need to do something like a little brighter. And so like I wound up working on a YA sci-fi book after that, which hasn't been announced. It doesn't have a home yet. And right now I'm working on a crime book that is pretty ambitious structurally, and another horror book, actually two horror books that they each have different muscle groups, and one of them I feel really strongly about, and the other one I'm still kind of figuring out like what do I love about this book. It's so kind of early on and embryonic. I think to answer your question, I like it when the books are a little subversive. I also like it when it just covers a wider range of subject matter. I want to be an evangelist for this industry, and I don't want to preach to the choir. I want converts, and by virtue of that, it's like I want to make my books really varied. I want 31 flavors, because if somebody doesn't like Spencer and Locke, for example, that's why Going to the Chapel was the very next thing I did. And I can tell you, the number one thing I heard from people when Going to the Chapel came out was that was from the guy who did Spencer and Locke. And yes, I contain multitudes. I'm complex. I'm like an onion. But that's really the stuff that I try to go for, is just what will give you an emotional response, and then I take it across as many different genres as I can.
And I think it's a really, commend you a lot, the fact of you can see that you have you do have that versatility to go to these different genres and stuff, and they are very different from one another, and they are very different in how they come across. And I really like the way that you put it across as well, that you want to be an evangelist for comic books, essentially. You want to, you don't want to put something out there that's just for, comic book fans. You want to show people like, hey, there's something here that you might be interested in, and that's something that I've always kind of held my heart to, of like that, is like that everybody's a comic book fan, they just don't know it. I'm like, you tell me what you're interested in, and I can find you a comic book that covers that.
100%.
You tell me what you like to read, you tell me the sort of stuff you like to watch, the stuff that you enjoy, the types of story, and I can guarantee you I can find you a comic out there that hits those notes.
That's often what I'm doing now, is very much thinking, okay, what's a demographic I haven't hit yet, or something that I enjoy. It's funny, I was thinking about this just last night, is I think part of the reason I was a reviewer for as long as I was, it was sort of a way to extend pleasure that I had gotten from reading the comic. It's sort of, what's better than reading a comic is reading a comic and then talking about the comic. And I think I've sort of I got desensitized to just talking about the comic, and I said, well, what's more fun than just reading a comic and then talking about a comic? It's making a comic that in some way speaks to the original that I liked so much.
Yeah.
I mean, that's literally why we started the show, was the idea of like, hey, let's talk about comics. We enjoy talking about comic stuff so much, let's make sure we've got a place to give everyone that wants to join the conversation can come and join us. And
it's a way to sort of extract that little bit of extra, bone marrow out of the meal.
Like savoring savoring that good meal.
So if there's ever something that I feel particularly passionate about, I mean, part of the reason why Scout's Honor, a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult really spoke to my love of the Fallout franchise. That's a video game that I had to ban myself from playing, because I was like, I won't get any work done. I will not get any work done. I'll spend hours and hours playing it. But sort of that weird post-apocalyptic alt history kind of stuff, that's baked into Scout's Honor's DNA. But at the same time, we're sort of able to take, I think a really interesting look at politics and gender and identity.
Hmm.
And we're sort of able to turn that into a book about self-actualization.
Yeah.
And I think it's the sort of book that people will see it and see the high concept and be like, oh yeah, that sounds like a Pepose book. But then they'll read it and yeah, they'll be like, oh, I cried, so it's definitely a Pepose book. But I think like the actual angle of which I made people cry, I think was very different. And so yeah, it's all about sort of taking those influences and repurposing them. And I think that's a way that really gets me to connect with those influences, but also internalize and own them in a way that's very unique to anything else.
So, so as a creator, coming from the creative perspective, how do you foster an environment for yourself of inspiration? Like, how do you remain inspired to keep doing these different types of things?
Last minute panic. No, you know, just to paraphrase Bill Watterson there. No, I mean, thankfully, I'm really lucky in the sense that, like I said, I'm restless, so I come
Hmm.
up with ideas pretty quickly. The question is whether or not the idea will sort of last the test of time.
Yeah.
You there are certain ideas that I come up with that don't really get like I usually like to wait at least a month.
Hmm.
Now, if I remember the idea in a month, then maybe it's worth pursuing.
Yeah.
But Scouts Honor was for actually was a very spur of the moment idea that I happened to send to Aftershock along with a slew of other log lines that had been sort of gestating for a long time. And of
Hmm.
course, Aftershock picked the one that I had like come up with like the week prior.
Yeah.
And so that was very much like thinking on my feet. And there's an outline that I'm working on right now that is actually in the exact same boat where I'd come up with it like a week before I had sent it a bunch to the editors, and of course the editor was like, "Yeah, let's flesh out that one." And I'm like, "Oh,
Yeah.
crap, I gotta actually
Really?
flesh that out." Um, I think the high concepts. I mean, those are a dime a dozen, though. I mean,
Mhm.
everybody can kind of come up with a high concept. It's following through and executing that's tough. And that's very much it's an ongoing evolution. I feel like, especially in the last year, really even the last 6 months, I've had a lot of changes. We got a brand new puppy who takes a lot of attention. I moved, so that there's a lot of sort of just figuring out basic infrastructure of where I live.
Mhm.
Um, but for me, the ways that I tend to keep inspired, music is a big thing, and it's something that I often forget. Is that listen to a bunch of music, like just see what imagery kind of pops out if you find a song that hits that energy that you're looking
Mhm.
for. Um, you are what you eat, so a lot of research, and I think the big thing is consuming media that's in the same headspace
Mm.
of the thing you're trying to go for. For example, I'm working on a crime outline right now, and so I've been watching crime, 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 crime.
Yeah.
And you'd be surprised at even the things this hits me a lot. I'll see a movie and I'll be like, well, I don't know if I really want to watch that. I don't know if I loved it when I saw it the first time. I watched Logan Lucky
Hmm.
uh, again last night. I was not expecting a whole lot out of it. I watched all the Soderbergh Ocean's movies. I do love those movies a lot, but I was kind of like, oh, it doesn't reach that scale. And as I watched it, like I had a like a light bulb idea that like
Yeah.
fixed a major story problem that I had been like
Oh, that's
nagging
awesome.
over. And so I think taking the time to just like mainline a whole bunch of stuff in your genre, I think is
Mhm.
very important. Because I think it can be very easy to spend all your time researching.
Mhm.
You go on Google and you're like, oh, like, I want to learn about building architecture, and you spend all this time, just going down the K-hole about building architecture and you're not writing anything.
Yeah.
You know, those overall ideas, you can figure that out on the fly, I think. I think everybody has a certain idea of building architecture, for
Hmm.
example, that like you can go into the weeds for like flavor, but like
Yeah.
if your whole story is about like the hatch in the Death Star and having to figure out, well, what's that hatch for? It's an exhaust hatch. Well, where's that hatch go down to? It goes down to the core. Oh, it's that becomes like a lot,
Yeah.
for you to hinge a whole story on. Like audiences don't care. There's a vent and it goes
Mhm.
down to the core, and you don't need to go past that.
Yeah.
Um, you know, and so I think music, the pop culture you're consuming. I do a lot better with film and television than I do actually reading other comics. I feel like there are a lot of comics fans out there, and I'm sure there are a lot of aspiring comics writers out there who they just read comics.
Yeah.
And that becomes like the snake eating its own tail. Like, you're not going to bring anything new if you're just focusing on one industry. But
Well, yeah.
like,
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, David. I
no,
was gonna say, like, based off what you were just saying, I can see in Spencer and Locke, like, it's like cinematic the way that it's laid out. Like, yeah, so I can definitely see where you're coming from.
like there are elements that I draw from certain writers,
Hmm.
just in terms of overall execution.
Hmm.
For example, I like the way that Rick Remender paces out action sequences. So that was something that I really, I took it into consideration. I looked at people like Rebender and Mark Miller and Frank Miller, of course. Just being like, how do they do a fight scene?
Hmm.
Or seeing the way that creators like Dan Slaughter, Jeff Johns, how do they handle character? Characterization, and what are the sorts of big moments that they would do for a character?
Hmm.
By the way, or Devin Grayson actually is really kind of my big. She's my biggest influence, and she's always so gracious every time I fanboy out at her on Twitter when somebody talks about her run on Batman from the early 2000s. Um, but yeah, as far as actual like content, now there are a lot of people who just they recycle comics, and
Hmm.
there's only so much you can do from that. I would much rather, learn from film and television and just be like, okay, these are people who, yeah, they have bigger budgets and they have more staff, but they're having to produce stories that at the end of the day have to pass muster.
Hmm.
And they often pass muster with a much larger subsection of the populace than our comics do.
Hmm.
So how do we make things more accessible? How do we make them more accessible, not simplistic, but less esoteric,
Hmm.
easier to follow and get engaged and invested in.
Yeah.
Uh, and so I think that's something that sometimes our industry gets a little confused with, where they go so esoteric that it's like, yeah, great, you're, 100 people might like really vibe on this, might really get it, but like a lot of people are going to be scratching their heads and being like, I don't understand what this book is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And, I argue just like there are readers out there who would read anything, no matter how bad it is. There are some readers out there who would read something that's super crazy complicated. They're the super connoisseurs, and that's great. They would also read something that's just accessible, you
Yeah.
know? And so that's kind of the sweet spot I'm trying to be in. I'm never going to be, much as I'd love to, I'm never going to be Jonathan Hickman. I'm never going to be Kieran Gillen. I'm never going to be Al Ewing. But, could I be like the best B-lister you've ever heard of? That seems like an achievable goal. And so that's sort of the thing I'm trying to do is just make things accessible and make you really feel something out of it
Hmm.
and take as big of a swing conceptually as I can and then try to actually follow through with some character work and some good
Yeah.
action sequences and then you know hopefully it'll work out. But yeah, it's just yeah, trying to stay inspired. It's very much a question of you know music influences, taking in more media, and I think also knowing when to call it a day. And
Yeah.
that's something that I'm working on. It's something I'm very bad at. It's something that now that the pandemic is wrapping down, like going back to the gym, taking a walk,
Yeah.
um, After this podcast, I'm going to be taking my puppy to the dog park. Like, it's a nice way to just unplug and let
Yeah.
your subconscious kind of mull over some stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's tough, and it's like everything I'm saying. It's no one size fits all.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's different for everybody.
That's
No,
awesome.
absolutely.
I think we might have another question from Tom, if you have time.
It's on.
So his question is, how would you approach a one-panel comic story?
One panel comic story. Like, I mean, it'd have to be like Marmaduke, or Family Circus. Um, I feel like for me, if I was approaching a one panel, actually, you know what? There's two ways to do it. You either do it like Marmaduke or the Family Circus, where it's just a joke.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one funny image and a punchline. Um, usually like usually you see an image of somebody doing something weird, and then you have like a one liner that's like ironic. Sir, this is a Wendy's. Um, but there is another way to do it. This is kind of a cheat because it's not really one panel; it's one page. But you do sort of the old school Marvel splash page. The first page of my book Roxy Rewind, I feel like we did a really good job at this. That we had one splash page of our hero, Juniper Wells, who is the daughter of two time travelers. And as the first ever daughter of two time travelers, she has the ability to manipulate time up to 60 seconds. So we have a big splash page of her in a fight with a supervillain. She said, Here, I'll open it up actually. 'Cause I'll read it. Dad was a time traveling physicist from the year 2150. My mom was a car hop at the Blue Star drive-thru in 1954. This is what you learn in my house when you ask where babies come from. My secret identity is Juniper Wells, but you can call me Roxy Rewind. But I'm probably getting ahead of myself. After all, this is my first day. And that really tells you everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, that's what matters. It's her. It's not really who she's fighting. I mean, who she's fighting is just a way to kind of put her through her paces. But that one page, which is technically one panel, you learn everything you need to know about the character, and you get a little bit of a sense of humor, just because I like to insert that when I can.
Yeah.
Just to kind of grease the wheels and humanize the characters a little bit. But you'd see, Mark Waid was really good. No, I say was, this is posthumous. He is very good, at doing opening page splashes. The one that really sticks out the most to me is he did his run on Fantastic Four. One of the issues opened up with a big splash page of Ben Grimm holding up a box, and there's a spring on the box, and it's got like a pie on it, and you see there's this pie all over his face.
Yeah.
That's the first page. I don't even think there was dialogue on it. But immediately, like, oh, that's the story. Ben Grimm got pranked.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's tough though. Starting off with a splash page, it's a tough way to start any story. It's not impossible. It's just not something I do very often because it's like tricky to make work.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, as far as a one panel story, it's not just like a flashback vignette, because like flashback vignettes, I mean, you see them in anything from Family Guy or New Girl, where they're like, oh, remember that time that Nick did such and such, and then you flash back and you see Nick Miller making like an outlandish statement, and then it cuts back to the present.
Mm-hmm.
You're not doing that, I think. Humor is really the way that I would go. I think you're able to kind of encapsulate that in a shorter burst than you would something like tragic.
Yeah.
I mean, you could do like baby shoes, never worn, for sale baby shoes never worn. You could probably do that in one panel. Yeah. But I think it's harder. It's harder to build up that investment. It has to be something like very universal.
Yeah,
One panels. I look at Marmaduke. I look at Family Circus. Even a lot of editorial cartoons. That technically counts. That's really, I think, the extent of what you can do with just one single panel.
Nice. And from his comment
Good
in
question.
the chat, it seems to be Tom's quite happy with that answer as well. Yeah, I mean, he says thank you for that. So yeah, Tom's coming with some of the challenging questions today.
That's a great question. I love thinking about that sort of process stuff, and I think that comes from my time as a reviewer. And like my best friends are all people I met in the trenches as reviewers. My buddy George Marston, I talk with them daily. My mentor Troy Brownfield, who he was the reviews editor at Newsarama before me, and he kind of gave me my break over there. I talk with him almost daily. Pierce Lydon, who was kind of one of the big reviewers over at Newsarama for a long time. I talk with them frequently, and it's a sort of this shared love of the medium, but I think it's also a shared love of storytelling and creativity. And I think having that brain trust, along with my partner, Claire, who, she's not a comics reader, but she's a voracious reader of fiction. And she kind of grounds me and kind of keeps me thinking about, well, like, what's the emotional beat here? Like, what's something that's accessible? What's something that, for somebody who isn't versed in comics, like, does this fly with you? And having that brain trust, I think is really crucial for me. And I think that kind of they're the guardrails for me, and making sure I don't jump the shark, making sure I don't go too far afield, making sure that, like, when I write something and when I commit to it, it's been vetted.
Yeah.
And I think that goes a long way with, me being confident in the work. And I think that goes a really long way into the way it's been received.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can definitely see there's a factor in it, like having all these influences is definitely, brought in a positive thing to it, and it can only be a good thing, to have different influences and different people from different perspectives just feeding in like that.
100%.
So to kind of switch gears as we're, as the podcast is plodding on, I want to switch back to some more of your recent stuff that you've worked on, and to delve into a little bit more. Major one I want to delve into some Scouts Honor, which I'm digging out. Digging out issue 5 because I love that cover. Just to show
I love that
for
cover.
for no other reason.
Such a good cover.
Funny story about that cover. I am about 95% sure. I remember which issue. That was originally going to be a cover. I want to say it was either for issue 2 or issue 3. And when Andy Clark sent it, and he had sent a couple slightly different versions of that cover. Basically the same general gist of it. I want to say that was issue 2. And I saw it. He had sent 2 different versions of issue 2. The one that actually came out, and he sent that. And I was like, oh, save that for the last issue.
I was going to say, like, that feels like it's completely, like, last issue fitting with what happens in the final issue of it. Like, I can't see that fitting issue 2 as well.
Yeah. Well, I was like having Kit seemingly on the same side as the Highwaymen. I was like, that's actually exactly where we're going with the book.
Yeah.
So, like, use that. But Jose Villarrubia, he is terrific. So it's funny. I met Jose a couple years ago because I'm buddies with Pornsak Pinchot, the writer of Infidel. Pornsak was the very first person I met at my DC internship. He was super friendly to me in the elevator on my first day, and Pornsak's been, like, just such a big supporter of my work. He helped me get my first manager. And helped me get repped for the first time. And so when Pornsak came back to the comics industry with Infidel, I was so blown away, when I read it. And learning that Jose not only colored but edited it, I was so impressed with the final product. And so when my editors, Christina Harrington and Mike Martz over at Aftershock, said, oh, we're going to get Andy Clark and Jose Villarrubia on covers, I was like, oh, that's wonderful. Jose is just... Jose and Matt Miller are interior color artists. Well, artists you do not need to hold their hands.
Mhm.
They know it works and they know it immediately and they know exactly where, like, it's like a model knowing their best angles. Know, these guys know what the best colors are for a particular scene and a particular thing. I think for Matt, I probably had to ask, like, right on, like, you could say it on like both hands, maybe even just one hand. The number of times I was like, oh, hey, can we tweak this one thing? But yeah, Jose, when he turned in that fifth issue cover, I, to be honest, I'm not even sure I had seen it until it was up for pre-order. I
Wow.
don't know if I had. I'm not sure I did. And I just remember seeing it and being like, whoa, that is like the perfect way to end the book. It ends the book. I think that's the best cover of the series. And we had
Mhm.
some really good covers in that series. But it goes back to what we were talking about is that, um, a bad colorist will tank the strongest line art. But having the right colors, it really just elevates artwork to the next level. And Jose is, I want to work with Jose again. He is just a really terrific and striking artist, and from what I've been told, editor. And so yeah, Jose, if you're listening, we're this will not be the last.
That's all, like, as someone who's drawn to comics, like, I'm probably on the opposite side of cross. Like, I pick comics because of the art, not necessarily the story. If the story's awesome, that's just an added bonus for me. But I'm drawn more towards the art. And I had these on my kitchen table the other day. I had the Scouts Honors issues on my kitchen table, and I was just. It's funny we're talking about this issue because I remember looking at the cover. I'm like, this cover is fantastic. Like the attention to detail. Like I like trying to figure out how they did certain things. And at one point, I was like, I have no idea how they did that. That's phenomenal. But yeah, the attention to detail on this cover is awesome.
And that was all Jose. I mean, I he did not require a whole lot of. I don't think he took any direction for any of this. I think he just took Andy's line work and ran with it. And
Mm.
so yeah, I was really thrilled with Andy and Jose's covers for the book, and I was thrilled with artist Luca Casalanguida and colorist Matt Milla on interiors. Um, Luca's funny because I had actually reached out to Luca years ago about working on another project. And Luca was busy working on a small independent comic called James Bond. And so when Mike said, "Oh, hey, Luca Casalanguida is looking for a book," like, "Oh yeah, like I know Luca, like yeah, like let's do it." And I think Luca did a really superlative job on the book. He's got that Italian style. He is from Italy, um, and he's got that degree of grit. For
Hmm.
something that's post-apocalyptic, but he's able to shift gears really nicely. There are moments that are kind of quiet and beautiful and emotional, and then you immediately like the rug gets pulled out from underneath them, and suddenly it's like chaos and violence going on everywhere. And
Yeah.
Luca did a really great job shifting gears, especially because I tend to write pretty densely,
Hmm.
and I think one of the challenges I had writing Scouts Honor is it's the first series that I wrote in 20-page increments versus 22. Certain publishers want, that's how they operate. They do 20 pages. And you would be shocked at those extra 2 pages are always the extra 2 pages you need to either get a character beat out or to establish the villain or to pull off whatever thing you need to pull off.
Hmm.
So as a result, um, I think Scout's Honor was written a little more densely,
Hmm.
even compared to my usual fare. Um, and oh, I don't know if I cut out.
No, you're still here.
No, we can
Oh,
hear you.
okay. Yeah, I think as a result, the burden was on Luca, to execute and to execute in I think a blisteringly fast time frame.
Mm.
I think he was cranking out an issue. I think every 6 to 8 weeks.
Oh
Probably
wow.
on the lower end of that spectrum. And that's full layouts, pencils, and inks. I know he works
Huge.
digitally. That is helpful for him. But that's fast. I've never worked with an artist that fast.
Yeah, that's crazy.
And the fact that he pulled it off and did it so well, You know, it speaks. It's a real testament to what a talent Luca is. And so, if he ever comes to the States, I owe him a drink. Um, but yeah, I've been very fortunate to work with a lot of the collaborators that I have. And, in the case of Scouts Honor, that was all in Mike Marr, Christina Harrington, my editors, who are just really terrific people. I'm excited to hopefully find another project to work again soon. But yeah, it's just, I've been really fortunate with my collaborators. And I think that goes back to, my very first book, that goes back to honestly the book that I've always used as a playbook for my success is The Strange Talent of Luther Strode. I consider Justin Jordan a big influence. Not just the way that he navigates the industry and he understands the business of it, and the smartest thing that Justin ever did, and I'm sure he would agree with me on this, is for his very first book, he worked with Trad Moore, and so, my philosophy is find you some collaborators who make you look good, because ultimately that provides me a lot of.
Nope.
Might have lost him.
Oh, I think we might have lost him this time.
That's a good freeze frame, though.
That's perfect freeze frame.
All right, let me see.
Yeah, David, if you can hear us, you might need to disconnect and reconnect. Damn, we're getting right into a good flow there as well.
I know, man. There we go. Yeah, but how's everybody doing?
Sorry about that.
No, there we go.
I was just busy self-deprecating into the abyss. I was just gonna say, it's so good having collaborators as talented as the ones that I get to work with because, it gives me room to play around with stuff because I know that even if a particular moment maybe doesn't land the way that I had envisioned, I know it's gonna look excellent regardless. Yeah. And I think that gives me a lot of latitude, a lot of breathing room, and honestly, as a comics fan. Getting artwork is like the best part of my job.
Yeah.
And so, I get to just enjoy cool new artwork with everybody else. And it's been a very fun process. And Luca and Matt Milla, they're a dream team. And I can't thank my editors, Mike Martz and Christina Harrington, enough for bringing the team together like that.
Yeah. And it's a phenomenal team, and like you said, look at it, there's a lot of praise for it because as phenomenal as the covers are for Scouts Honor, the interior is beautiful as well.
Yeah.
Like the interior looks so good for this comic. It's well written, it's well drawn, it's well put together. I don't want to jump into a little bit of the story for that as well. Just so I was getting very aware of time as well for us. But into Scouts Honor because there's a lot of commentary that takes place in this book, and it has a lot of amazing beats in it because it's very, like you said before, it's set post-apocalyptic world. It's like the opening pages, we get this emergence from the underground. We're literally at the reclaiming the world stage almost of the and it's we're met with so much different stuff from the religious / cult aspect of the Boy Scouts and the Scouts taking over and becoming this, not just being the Boy Scouts we know, but being this almost military special forces,
like a religious organization
that are also got the religious concept. We've also got the take on our main character Kit, who of course is the wolf in sheep's clothing, almost the girl that has infiltrated this men's group. Because how dare a woman come in and try and do this stuff, and there is so many commentary beats. Even just reading the first issue, all these beats it's not overwhelming. It's one of those things all these different beats could hit, and it could be okay, this is getting too much. He's okay, we're talking this, and we're hitting this, and we're hitting this, but it doesn't feel like it's an overwhelming hitting all these different beats and all these different commentaries. It all kind of flows together. But the message isn't lost on any of those things.
It's funny because so much of that, when when I think of writing a script, I think a lot about my time when I worked in newspapers when I graduated college. I graduated in the recession, so my internship at DC, there were no jobs. There was no jobs anywhere. So I worked as a newspaper reporter for a few years after that. I worked in state politics and I worked in crime, and a lot of that's kind of finding the thread and following it. You feel a little like a detective. And I feel like that's exactly the case for comic writing, and I think that's part of the reason why I'm slow at it. Is I think I'm less like inventing things and more just like, okay, well, I have this idea. Where's the logical place it would go, or where's the most interesting place that this could organically lead to? And so I spent a lot of time trial and erroring my way through that. And Scout's Honor, I think a lot of the commentary came through that. It was I pitched a book to Aftershock saying, hey, it's about a post-apocalyptic Boy Scout cult, and one of the initiates finds out it's not as on the up and up as they thought. That was it. Kit was not a woman at that point. It was only when Aftershock said, "Yeah, do the Boy Scout one," that I was like, "Oh crap." At the time it was 2019. I said, an all dudes book is not going to fly in 2019 unless there's like a very, it's one thing if you did something about like a military platoon, like that would maybe make sense. But this is not going to, it's not going to fly.
Yeah.
And I realized like, I don't know, lean into that. Like it is weird to have like a book that's all dudes,
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, well, what's it like for a woman having to kind of navigate this organization that might as well have a sign on the door that says, boys only.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's literally the Boy Scouts. It's literally like
it's in the name.
Half the world is not allowed to be part of this, right there off the.
Yeah. And so yeah, I think and that kind of that then mutated into Des being gay and being sort of the closeted son of the pastor, of this, the religious leader of this cult. And, the idea of, exploring toxic masculinity and seeing, this is the logical extension and what happens, to people who don't fit in that mold and how do they live their lives and how do they navigate the demands of their culture while sort of exploring like, well, what's true to them, what's true to themselves. And, none of that was that all came out in like the first outline, but none of that was in the log line that Aftershock had asked for. So I'm glad they went for it. I'm glad they liked it. And I think that's the sort of thing that it takes a little while to get to. Not every idea I've come up with, like I'm able to get to that point where I'm like, well, what's the bigger point here? Sometimes it's an emotional point. Sometimes it's a point about a greater theme or a political message. But I feel like if you can't figure out like what's the meaning behind the book, then it's just stuff.
Yeah.
And it takes a little while to get there. And like I said, I'm working on an outline right now, a horror outline, where like that's what I'm grappling with right now. Is I'm like, well, what's the bigger message here?
Yeah.
Besides this group of dudes who are doing a thing, like, well, okay, that's what the log line is, but what's the story about? Scout's Honor. It was a stressful book. I feel like that was very much me flying by the seat of my pants, and I luckily pulled a smooth landing on it.
Yeah.
But it's also a book that like I've been studying a lot lately and just kind of figuring out like, okay, like how do I replicate that? And not necessarily not every book is going to be Scout's Honor. Not every book is going to hit at the same angle or have the same kind of tone and message. But I do think that in a lot of ways, it's the book that has maybe the strongest message out of anything I've written, and so it's something that I want to learn from and apply it when appropriate.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing I found about Scout's Honor, and I definitely don't mean this as a criticism towards the book, and it's like, but there's so many elements of the story that we've seen them before. Like, there's definitely elements. So like the you know, like the cult that's kind of overarching everything, and you find out it's not really the way it's meant to be. In fact, everything is built upon as a lie. The basis upon, like, oh, the main hero being a girl that's pretending to be a man. I mean, like, that's literally Mulan. You know, I mean, it's like, it's not like we've not seen these things take place before, and it's like, but it would have been so easy for that to be detrimental to the book, of just being able to read it and go, oh yeah, well, we've seen that before, so. But it's done in such a great way that, like, because although those are beats to it, those are not like that's not the most important thing. The thing that you connect with first is the characters. So, like, it doesn't matter that we've seen this happen with a cult before, that this stuff has not really been there, because we're following this journey of, like, Kit and Des and the people that round about them, and, you know, starting to find out in the later issues, you start to delve into, well, who are the Highwaymen? Because they were just these bad guys first, but who are they? Who are the real scouts? Who are these people really? And it's that connection to the character, I think, delves it deeper, you know? Yeah.
It's funny because it's like, that's often something that, like, I'm agonizing over, is like, I think about, like, bigger questions, and then I'm like, well, this is the space you have. You have 5, you have 4 to 6 issues, depending on the publisher, depending on the story, depending on your budget. And so you start to hack away at stuff pretty quick. I always say, I'm not the guy who invented peanut butter, and I'm not the guy who invented jelly. I'm just the idiot who figured out to put them together. Yeah. And that's, I think, I'm looking for the chocolate and the peanut butter. I'm looking for the pineapple and the pizza. Like, what's like 2 weird tastes that'll go well together? What's the overlap here? But also, what's like, what, when you add them together, what's the new thing? And so, yeah, I think my work certainly, it leans towards the familiar, but I think it's also, it's like a way to get readers over that initial hurdle, of hesitance. Because, it's like, every time you sell something, it's a little bit like a con, like, you have to convince somebody to drop their hard-earned money on something sight unseen to see if they would like it. So having that little bit of familiarity, that touchstone, that people will be like, oh, I know the Boy Scouts, and then sometimes you have people who are like, I was a Boy Scout, I would love to read something about the Boy Scouts.
Yeah.
And then you're able to sort of take those expectations and stab somebody in the back with them. Be like, oh, you thought you knew the Boy Scouts. Let me show you. Let me show you what I can do to the Boy Scouts. And I do that with all my books. And if you can do it in a way that, like, there are still, like, the characters, even if the high concepts are absurd, the characters themselves are like, well, this is the world I live in.
Yeah.
And these are the emotional things that happen to me because of this absurd world that I live in that they don't know is absurd. That, I think, goes a long way to making these weird concoctions that I make in my office palatable for a larger audience.
Yeah, and I think it kind of plays into, like, what we talked about earlier, that idea of subverting something that you kind of know. Like, what's the hook for Spencer and Locke? It's like, well, I mean, it's what I pitched it as when I was pitching it to our audience that we're going to talk about it. Like, you ever wonder what would happen if Calvin and Hobbes grew up and he became, Calvin became this grizzled noir detective, but Hobbes was still with him?
The log line that sold the book, and continues to sell the book, I always say, is, what if Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City?
Oh, that's perfect, actually. Yeah, that is the thing that I probably say that hundreds of times at conventions every time. Yeah, I will definitely be using that if I ever pitch the book to anybody. It's like, that's perfect.
Going to the chapel is what if Die Hard met Wedding Crashers? The OZ is what if Bad Max took place in The Wizard of Oz? And Scout's Honor is actually probably the longest log line, which is years after a nuclear war, a cult has risen from the ashes, and their Bible's an old Boy Scout manual.
Yeah. It's true, though, isn't it? It's a perfect hook for... I love that Tom Levine, even in the chat, saying that you and your hooks.
It's I feel like if I don't have that hook, then the idea is too complicated.
Yeah, but that's though. It's the elevator
really
pitch.
good.
It's the
Yeah.
like if you want to
Yeah.
hook people on what your book is, that's the thing you always do. It's like, well, it's this meets this because like you want to give them an idea of like this is what you're getting in for. Like, are you a fan of
Yeah.
this? Then you're going to like this. It's
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes it's about just sort of talking about your influences. I think Tom had actually asked me this on Twitter the other day, where there are some people who just throw out random crap because they're thinking like, oh, I can hook, somebody who likes Mad Max, for example. But if that's not really like an influence to the book, you know, then it kind of becomes a little cheap, you
Mm-hmm.
know. I think people can feel cheated very easily when you have those sorts of things. So I always try to be really careful with it, but figuring out, yeah, like what are the big influences? Like Grand Theft Astro, I always, I say it's Fast and Furious meets Back to the Future in space. And that's that probably boils it down pretty quickly. Is that you get a sense of, oh, it's people who are driving fast spaceships, stealing things, and there's a time travel component to it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think once that book comes out, and believe me, it's killing me more than anybody that it's not out yet because it's been written for so long. It's just sort of getting all the ducks in a row with the art. But when that book comes out, it's going to be like something that all my Spencer and Locke fans are going to be like, oh yeah, I see that. But anybody who liked the OZ or anybody who likes Scouts Honor is going to be like, oh, I see what he's doing with like bright sci-fi. And so, yeah, I think having a good hook for your book, I think it helps kind of nudge the reader a little bit and it primes their expectations. And I know there are people who talk about death of the author and all that, but you know, if I can sell the thing, to somebody either through this interview or at a con or online, the marketing is like the last little bit of creative push I have.
Yeah, absolutely.
Once it's in the reader's hands, then yes, the author is dead. But if I can promote the book in such a way that their expectations are primed,
Yeah.
I think it's a way. It's a way to get them. I think it's a way, not the way, a way to help ensure they get the maximum enjoyment out of the book.
It's like a trailer for the book.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like you're like, this is my vision for the book, and I'm trying to pitch you what, so you know where I was coming from in doing this. And
Yeah.
it's that last, like you said, it's that last little pitch of, like, the book's there, the book's created, the book's out there for you to buy. It's like, but this is my last little creative influence to show you this is where I was going with it. This is what my intention was, and. Yeah, I mean, you do it all the time, and people do that with everything. I mean, hell, we do that with our show. Like, like even our tagline is like meant to get across, like, hey, we're the greatest streamers you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's a rip on, like, Booster Gold's like thing, the greatest hero you've never heard of, who's a massive, to show that comic book influence and is a fan favorite. I love that character, but at the same time, it's to show, hey, we're awesome. You just not heard of us yet.
Yeah.
And it's like it's to get people thinking and talking and something that sticks with them, because a blurb in the back of a book is never going to stick with someone as much as, like you said, like that tagline. Like, hey, it's like Calvin and Hobbes grew up in Sin City. That's going to stick with someone more than any blurb on the back. Like, like that blurb is not going to stick in someone's head like off the bat, but you saying that is going to pitch it, and they're going to know exactly what you're talking about, and it's going to stick with them.
So it's an art just as much as a science, and I think everybody's got their own way of pitching their books, and I think it all kind of depends on who your target audience is, and are you targeting people who are diehard comics fans? Are you targeting people who have no idea about anything with comics like I am? Artists have it very differently, because artists, they don't have like a quick, easy one sentence pitch. But you have the visuals, like you can see the sort of stuff that they're drawing. And so, I mean, it's an ongoing process. And I think it's one that will simultaneously get easier and harder the more books I have. I'm excited to get back to conventions. I'm doing Rose City in September. It's my first con back. And I will have 5 different books to have on my table. Potentially, maybe even a little more if any. I participated in a couple of anthologies, and so if I get copies of those, by the time the con shows up, suddenly I have half a dozen books at my table. And figuring out the best way to sell all of those simultaneously is going to be an interesting process, and it's really going to put my aspirations to the test of the Baskin Robbins model. 31 flavors, something for everyone. That's something that I'm really excited about in theory, and I'm very curious to see how I will wind up implementing it in practice. But yeah, it's that's building things at scale. That's the thing that I really want for my career. Maybe I sound a little bit more like a publisher than a writer, which is the only way I could lose money faster than being a writer. But I think that's the aspiration. You see people like Cullen Bunn, you see people like Rick Remender, you see people like Justin Jordan, where they are making their bones doing a lot of creator-owned stuff. And that's how you stay relevant. That's how you stay in this career. And that's the thing that I really want to do for my career long term.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely a lot to be said for that, for the creator-owned elements of it. Even, some of the big, massive, like, comic book creators, like, if you only know them for, like, their, like, say, their Marvel and DC content, like you mentioned Donny Cates earlier, if you only ever read his Marvel stuff, you're completely missing out on some of his best work, because it's all
100%.
creator-owned stuff, like, that's something that pops to head right away, is something like God Country. Like, if that alone, like, is one of the best books that came out the year it came out, and it's still talked about today. And like, if you've never read the creator-owned stuff, you miss it. And it's like, that's one of the reasons when we do our comic book club, we do the indie comic book club, is because there's these amazing books out there that people just don't know exist.
It's a pendulum, I think, a lot of people, they find their voice and they do their most innovative work in the creator-owned and indie scene. And then they bring those innovations and that voice and that talent to licensed books where they build up a bigger following, and then the pendulum swings back and they go back to creator-owned with that bigger audience and that bigger market. And you can make the same argument about Kickstarter versus the direct market, where you bring your people from the direct market to Kickstarter, and then you build up your Kickstarter community, and you bring them back for something for the direct market, and you swing back and forth. And I think it's an ongoing process. And I think for me, I'm very impatient, and comics as a whole has really had to teach me how to be a little bit more patient and realize that, like, even though readers are experiencing things on a month-to-month basis and maybe a book-to-book basis, as a creator, you need to be thinking year to year. Figuring out, okay, this was my 5-year plan. This is what I've gotten out of the first 5 years. What can I do in the next 5 years? And what can I do in 10 years? And, I want to be a 30, 40-year man, like the Dan Slotts and the Grant Morrisons of the world. And the only way you can do that is if you're thinking big picture and long term.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's important as well. It's like, to be delving forward into something, especially this, where it's all, create our own stuff, and it's all, you your own boss, essentially pushing these ideas forward, and you're your own.
My boss is a jerk.
And it's like, but yeah, I think that's a definitely important thing. To kind of pull it back as we kind of start to wind down the podcast now, the last big book I did want to mention and talk about, with you mentioning Kickstarter, is the perfect transition over to it, is the O.Z., which, if I'm right, is that your first Kickstarter book you've done? Or?
My first Kickstarter. We're hoping to return to Kickstarter hopefully in the next month ish. Ruben Rojas is about halfway done drawing our double-sized second issue, so I feel like we're in a spot that we can that we can launch. We're in the process of getting those pages colored and lettered right now, so we have some new stuff to show on the Kickstarter page.
So tell us about the O.Z. then, because you kind of mentioned it earlier of like, it's like a, what if Mad Max took place in, the land of Oz. It's like, tell us about this book. Their first issue is out. It's a double-sized issue. It's like, we've got the link. We're going to throw it up in the chat in a second. You can literally go pick up issue 1 and be like on board at the ground floor here of like for the next Kickstarter.
I will mail it to you personally if you buy a one of the print copies. Um, yeah, so the OZ is it's about Dorothy, the original Dorothy's granddaughter, who's also named Dorothy, and she's a disillusioned Iraq War veteran who's come back home to take care of her grandmother, who's dealing with Alzheimer's and dementia, and you know, Dorothy has seen some things from her time in Iraq and Afghanistan, and she's kind of come home and she's really lacking direction and purpose, and that's when the tornado hits, and she finds herself stranded in the war-torn land of Oz. And as we find out, when her grandmother killed the Wicked Witch of the West, it started a power vacuum, not unlike Baghdad.
Okay.
Dorothy kills the Wicked Witch and then leaves. She convinces the Wizard of Oz to leave, and then she leaves. It's just all the power structures kind of fell at once, and so it turned into this kind of battlefield called the Occupied Zone, or as the locals call it, the OZ. And so we're able to see, a generation later, what happened to Oz since the Wicked Witch's death. And we see how this disillusioned soldier, she sees a second chance to confront her past and get things right.
Mm.
So we get to see kind of our own unique twists on the Wizard of Oz characters that everybody knows and loves. We have the Tin Man who, he's been destroyed and rebuilt so many times that he's kind of been turned into this giant metal war machine.
Nice.
You've got the our take on the Cowardly Lion, who's going to be, a big part of our second issue. Down to, what happened to the Scarecrow and what happened to the smartest man on Oz when sort of the world came kind of crumbling down all around him.
Mm.
And how would that affect somebody like that?
That sounds
Um,
very awesome.
it's I think it's one of my best books. I think that it's a perfect companion piece to Spencer and Locke. It's the same sort of cloth, but in a much bigger sense of scale.
Yeah.
I was able to tackle fantasy and war, in a way that the smaller scale of Spencer and Locke, the more intimate scale of Spencer and Locke would never allow. And we've got some really fun twists and turns coming. We've got some really fun action beats coming, especially for part two, as Dorothy goes on the quest for the Silver Slippers, which are kind of the perhaps what would be considered a weapon of mass destruction in Oz,
Wow.
because those silver slippers mean that you can cross dimensions,
Yeah.
and that means that a war that has already sort of taken over the land of Oz could spill over somewhere else.
Mm.
That's
Um,
that's such a phenomenal concept. Like honestly,
Yeah.
like hearing the pitch of it, and guys, the link's there for the Kickstarter. Go to the Kickstarter alone and watch the video like presentation of it, and you'll get to see David talking about it on there. You'll get to hear about the story, see some of the artwork. It's like I watched that and I'm like, yeah, I need to pick this up. Like I've not had a chance to actually like purchase it yet, but I am going to. Like I need to get this and check it out. It's the story just sounds phenomenal. Like even just that concept, I never thought about it before. Like within Dorothy being there in Oz, like the Wicked Witch gets killed, her sister's killed like right at the start of her arriving there. The wizard
Yeah.
disappears.
yeah,
So like three of the most like powerful people in Oz are just gone,
On.
and there's
Yeah.
nothing to take that place. And I'm like, why would you assume that would go well? Like if
Yeah.
if the world has taught us anything, that never goes well. It just means someone else steps in to fill the power vacuum, and I'm like, I'm in. I need to know what happens.
it was it was definitely, yeah, it was one of those stories that I was just like, I had been thinking I'd wanted to do a fantasy book for a while, and so I wrote down just a bunch of influences just to see, what could I pull from. And when I wrote down the Wizard of Oz, I just saw that word Oz, and I was like, oh, what if that's an acronym, you know? And when I thought of Occupied Zone, it just kind of hit me like, oh, this is a war book.
Yeah.
And so, and just like Spencer and Locke, like the story kind of just immediately started unspooling from there, where it's just like, oh yeah, like, I grew up, I was in high school during the invasion of Iraq. you know? And so you kind of see like, oh, like, you know, just because you know, it might feel like the emotional thing to do at the time, you know, take out you know, a dictator with zero prejudice. But then like if you don't have like a plan and like a really good plan, things fall apart.
Yeah.
And so that is some of the stuff that we explore in the OZ, and just kind of, you know, we tackle things from, you know, what would, you know, what is just warfare, you know, and what is considered unjust warfare, you know, things like torture, for example, is brought up not in this next issue, but it'll be brought up in our third and final double-sized issue. You know, there's a lot of fun twists and turns, a lot of characters taking some very unexpected, but I think organic twists to them. And so the OZ is one of my favorite books that I've written. I think probably second only to Spencer and Locke. And yeah, I just, you know, working with artist Ruben Rojas and colorist Whitney Kogar, and letterer DC Hopkins, I could not be working with a better group of people, especially for my first Kickstarter book, you know, which is, it's harder. You know, you have to handle all your own logistics. You know, you have to figure out printing. You have to coordinate all your own variant covers, which is a little bit more challenging, you know, doing it when you don't have a publisher attached. You have to handle your own budget. You have to handle all the scheduling. You have to make sure that all your production stuff works. That was really hard the first time around.
Yeah.
Now that I've done it, it's a lot less scary. And I think having my team behind me was really important for all of that. So yeah, we're very excited. We're looking to launch the next Kickstarter, hopefully in July. You know, if I can kind of get my ducks in a row and we get the pages together in time. We've got some really cool variant covers coming from this one. We're just getting the last colors on one of them now. But yeah, we've got some really fun stuff coming, and
awesome.
very excited for people to get to see what we have in store for the next issue. Issue 1 was the quiet one. And so,
as always,
yeah, issue 2 is where we really get to tear the roof off in a big way, especially when you get to see what we did with the lion. Who the Tin Man's my favorite character in the series, just because of how Ruben Rojas designed him. But Ruben's favorite character is the lion.
Nice.
And so seeing the way that Ruben has drawn him. In fact, Ruben even skipped some pages drawing this issue because he was like, I just want to draw the lion. Like, I just want to draw that page with him in it real quick. And I was like, all right.
Go for it.
You know, but yeah, it's just, you know, the whole team is really firing in all cylinders. I think we're going to come back with a vengeance for the second issue based on what I've seen already. And, you know, it's taken a little longer than I would like. Like I've said, that's the hardest part about being in the comics industry is figuring out patience. And especially during this last year, we had some COVID related delays, which is part of the reason why the book, you know, we haven't released it yet. And we didn't want it to step on Scout's honor. You know, we wanted to make sure the books had time to breathe.
Yeah.
But yeah, now that, you know, Scout's Honor is, you know, mostly wrapped, besides the trade, which we'll be promoting at the end of the month, you know, yeah, it's time, you know, to bring this book out, and we're at a pretty good spot now. We're at a pretty good critical mass. So yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for people to see what we've got for our next issue. It'll be worth the wait.
Definitely.
Awesome.
And just want to shout out ads in our chat again saying it's like, I will be purchasing the OZ, it looks so awesome. So there you go, you've already got another person looking to pick it up. And 100% if he's probably already bought it knowing ads, he usually jumps on stuff like this, so I think it's right up his alley. But yeah, it sounds phenomenal, like, and I can't wait to see what happens with this, and very excited that you took the step into the Kickstarter world and took that brave step of like, I'll handle all this myself. It
was necessity. You know, this was you know, it was during COVID. You know, Diamond had their shutdown. I had a lot of friends who had success with Kickstarter. My friend Charlie Stickney from White Ash, especially. And the thing that got me to do it was he was like, you know, there's a whole demographic of people who only buy their comics on Kickstarter. They don't go to cons. they don't go to comic shops, and so you're missing out on a whole demographic of people, of really passionate readers who who will support your work. And I was blown away. Being able to sort of have that Kickstarter audience and to bring them together with people who followed from the direct market, it's sort of it's patching together a diaspora of comics readers and really inviting them to break bread at the same big table. And that's, if you take anything out of this interview, I want to keep building a bigger table.
Definitely, absolutely, and
there's a way to do it.
Anything we can do to help build that, by all means, let us know. It's like your vision for what you want to do, and the vision for what you want to do, and reach out to people and show them, hey, there's a comic out there for each of you. That's literally what we want to do with comics as well. To show that this is an amazing community that everyone can be part of. Quick shout out into the chat. Thank you so much, Tom Levine, for that follow. Welcome to the Comic Clan. Thank you so much for dropping that follow on the channel and helping us towards that goal of 500 followers here on Twitch. We absolutely appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that covers everything that I wanted. Did you have any other questions or anything you still had that you wanted to ask?
I had a whole list of questions, and I think all of them have been answered throughout the conversation. So I think we're good.
Because my laptop's at 7%. But no, I want to thank you guys for having me on the show, and thank you for everyone watching. If you want to follow me, and what I'm up to, you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at PeposeD, or David Pepose Comics on Facebook. You can also visit my website, davidpepose.com, and subscribe to my newsletter, Pep Talks, at bit.ly/pepnews. I will have another newsletter out, I believe, on Tuesday. That way you can sort of get looped in on the latest and greatest. One last thing is also I will be a part of the Help anthology on Kickstarter. It's launching, I believe, on Tuesday. It's a benefit. It's an anthology benefiting the Hero Initiative. So I have a one-page story set really at the beginning of the pandemic with my buddy Tony Donnelly from Albert Einstein Time Mason, and my friend and mentor Dave Dwanch, the co-writer of Jenny Zero. So definitely check it out and bid heavy, because the Hero Initiative could really use it.
Absolutely, that's awesome, man. Thank you so much for shouting that out. And all the links are in the chat for you to visit David's website, get his newsletter, hit him up on his social media accounts. And I'll also throw up again, here's the links for all his comics that I could find. So to pick up Spencer Locke 2, Going to the Chapel, to pick up Scouts Honor on Comixology at the moment, just because it is in the single issues, or you can go to your local store for that. And then of course the Kickstarter page for the O.Z. issue 1, which 100% you guys should be picking that up. I'm definitely going to be.
We will definitely be picking that up.
But a massive thank you for coming on the show, David. This has been such a blast to talk to you. It's been so much fun to connect with you and get to delve into these amazing stories, and maybe we can even have you back on the show in the near future when some more of your stuff starts to drop and we can delve into some more of the upcoming stuff.
Well, thank you so much for having me, guys, and thanks so much for taking the time, and thank you for our support. Thank you for everyone out there watching.
Absolutely. If you need to head off, since you said your laptop is dying, by all means you can duck out and we can go.
Thank you guys very much. I'm going to head out. Thank you again for having me.
Yes,
no
thanks again, man.
Thank you so much, David. You take care. Have an awesome day. Alright, thank you so much, Comic Clan, for joining us today. This has been absolutely phenomenal.
That was awesome.
That was an amazing conversation with him, and I'm not going to lie, like, there was so many other questions and so many other things and I kind of wanted to delve into it, and we just honestly just ran out of time on the show. I could have, but at the same time, nothing was a wasted time. There were great conversations, great delving into with.
He could not have been more generous with his conversation.
He was absolutely awesome. This was so much fun, and 100% guys, go and check out these awesome comics. So far I've read Spencer Locke and Scouts Honor. I am so excited to pick up the O.Z.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie, when he was talking about O.Z., he was talking about what would happen with the power vacuum, I'm like, dude, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, that's
a cool concept.
But for now, that is it for us. We are going to head off. You all have an absolutely amazing Sunday. Take care. Enjoy your evening. If you're not in the States and you're elsewhere and it's later in the night or morning, enjoy your full day ahead. But thank you so much. Awesome. First piece was epic. Still I'm blown away by the job you did. Absolutely, Chunky did an amazing job in that first piece.
Thanks, man.
But we love absolutely all of you. You all take care. Have an amazing day, and I will see you all again tomorrow. And remember,
Adios, muchachos.
it's a good week to be a geek, and you are burdened with glorious porpoise. If you've not caught the start of the show when I messed up that and we ended up talking about glorious porpoise, that's going to really confuse you. But you are burdened with glorious purpose, people. Remember that.
I almost went nasal on that. That was hilarious. That was so
But y'all take care, and we will see you later.
good. See you guys. See everybody.